Sarah Martinez had always been the smallest person in any room she entered. At 22 years old, she stood barely 5 feet tall and weighed less than most people's backpacks. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, and she had a habit of looking down when people spoke to her. Most folks who met Sarah thought she was fragile, like a flower that might break in a strong wind. She worked at Murphy's Diner on the outskirts of Camp Pendleton, a military base in California. Every day she served coffee and burgers to Marines who towered over her like giants. They were kind to her, but she could see it in their eyes. They thought she was weak. Some even called her Little Bird because she seemed so delicate and ready to fly away at any moment. Sarah lived alone in a tiny apartment above the diner. Her landlord, Mr. Murphy, was like a father to her, since her real parents had died in a car accident 3 years ago. She spent most of her free time reading books about history and watching old movies. She didn't have many friends, and dating seemed impossible when most men made her feel invisible. The Marines who came to the diner were different from the regular customers. They moved with purpose, spoke with confidence, and carried themselves like they owned the world. Sarah admired their strength, but felt like she lived in a completely different universe. They would joke with each other about their training, their missions, and their weekend plans, while Sarah quietly refilled their coffee cups and cleared their plates. One particular group of 6 Marines visited the diner every Tuesday evening. They called themselves the Iron Six and were known throughout the base as some of the toughest fighters in their unit. Their leader was Sergeant Mike Thompson, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks. The others followed his lead in everything, from what they ordered to how they treated the staff. Thompson had a way of making Sarah feel even smaller than usual. He would snap his fingers to get her attention instead of saying her name. He would make jokes about how the wind might blow her away, and his friends would laugh along. Sarah never said anything back. She would just nod, smile politely, and continue working. But Sarah had a secret that nobody at the diner knew about. Every morning before work, she drove 30 minutes to a small gym in the next town. There, she trained in mixed martial arts with an old instructor named Master Chen, who had been teaching fighting techniques for over 40 years. Sarah had started training after her parents died, looking for something to make her feel stronger inside. Master Chen saw something special in Sarah from the very first day. While other students focused on building bigger muscles, he taught Sarah to use her size as an advantage. He showed her how to move like water, flowing around bigger opponents instead of trying to match their strength. He taught her pressure points, joint locks, and techniques that could drop someone twice her size in seconds. For 3 years, Sarah had been learning these skills in secret. She never talked about her training, never showed off her abilities, and never let anyone know that the quiet little waitress could defend herself. Master Chen always told his students that true strength came from within, and the most dangerous fighters were often the ones nobody suspected. The other customers at the diner saw Sarah struggle to carry heavy trays and assumed she was weak everywhere else too. They didn't know that she could break boards with her bare hands or that she practiced her kicks on heavy bags until her legs felt like steel. They saw her quiet nature and mistook it for fear, not knowing that Master Chen had taught her to observe everything and react only when necessary. Sarah's life followed the same pattern every day: work at the diner, train at the gym, read at home, and sleep. She was content with this routine, even though she sometimes felt lonely. She told herself that she didn't need anyone else's approval or friendship. She had her books, her training, and her memories of her parents to keep her company. But deep down, Sarah sometimes wondered what it would be like to have people respect her for who she really was. She imagined what it might feel like to walk into a room and have people see her as strong instead of fragile. She dreamed of a day when someone would need her help instead of her always being the one who needed protecting. The Iron Six had no idea that their quiet little waitress was actually a trained fighter. They continued their Tuesday visits, making their jokes and treating Sarah like she was made of glass. Thompson would sometimes accidentally bump into her just to watch her stumble, thinking it was funny to see someone so small try to keep her balance. Sarah endured it all with patience, just as Master Chen had taught her. He always said that a true warrior knows when to fight and when to wait. Sarah was waiting, though she didn't know what for. She kept serving coffee, kept training in secret, and kept living her quiet life, not knowing that everything was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. The trouble started on a rainy Tuesday evening in October. Sarah was wiping down tables when she noticed a new face among the Iron Six. A tall, muscular man with cold gray eyes had joined their usual group. The others called him Rodriguez, and from their conversation, Sarah learned he was a new transfer from another base. Rodriguez was different from the other Marines. While Thompson and his friends were loud and boisterous, Rodriguez watched everything with calculating eyes. Sarah felt uncomfortable whenever his gaze fell on her, like he was studying her for weaknesses. There was something predatory about the way he smiled that made her skin crawl. During their meal, Rodriguez kept making comments about Sarah that were far worse than Thompson's usual teasing. He talked about how easy it would be to break someone so small, and he made suggestions about what he'd like to do to her that made Sarah's stomach turn. The other Marines laughed nervously, but Sarah could tell even they were uncomfortable with Rodriguez's crude remarks. After the group left that night, Sarah found herself shaking as she cleaned up their table. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, just another rude customer she'd have to deal with. But something about Rodriguez felt different, more dangerous than the usual jerks who came through the diner. The next week, Rodriguez returned with the group, but this time he stayed behind after the others left. Sarah was alone in the diner except for Mr. Murphy, who was in the back office doing paperwork. Rodriguez approached the counter where Sarah was cleaning and leaned in close enough that she could smell his aftershave. "You know, little bird," he said, using Thompson's nickname for her. "I've been thinking about you all week." His voice was low and threatening. "A tiny thing like you shouldn't be working so late by herself. Lots of dangerous people out there." Sarah kept cleaning, trying to ignore him. "Mr. Murphy is here," she said quietly, hoping her boss would come out of the office. Rodriguez laughed. "That old man, he couldn't protect you from a stiff breeze." He reached out and grabbed Sarah's wrist. His grip was tight enough to hurt. "I think you and I should get to know each other better. Maybe I could walk you home tonight." For the first time in 3 years of training, Sarah felt the urge to use her skills. She could easily break Rodriguez's grip and put him on the ground before he knew what happened. But Master Chen's voice echoed in her mind. Violence should always be the last option. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. "I have to finish closing up," Sarah said, gently but firmly pulling her wrist free. Rodriguez let her go, but his eyes remained fixed on her face. "Another time then," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'm a patient man, Sarah. I know where to find you." The fact that he knew her name, even though she'd never told him, sent chills down Sarah's spine. After he left, she locked all the doors and windows before finishing her work. That night, she barely slept, jumping at every sound outside her apartment. The harassment continued for weeks. Rodriguez would show up at random times, sometimes with the other Marines, sometimes alone. He would make comments about Sarah's appearance, suggest things he wanted to do with her, and find excuses to touch her hand or shoulder. Each time Sarah would politely but firmly reject his advances, but Rodriguez seemed to enjoy her discomfort. The other Marines started to notice Rodriguez's behavior, but none of them said anything to stop him. Thompson actually seemed to encourage it, laughing at Rodriguez's crude jokes and adding his own comments about how Sarah should lighten up and learn to take a compliment. Mr. Murphy was getting older and spent most of his time in the back office, so he didn't see what was happening. Sarah didn't want to worry him or cause problems for the diner's business with the base. She told herself she could handle the situation on her own, but Rodriguez was getting bolder. He started showing up during Sarah's morning shifts when fewer people were around. He would sit at the counter and watch her work, making comments about her body and what he wanted to do to her. Other customers would look uncomfortable and leave quickly, but Rodriguez didn't care. One afternoon, Rodriguez cornered Sarah in the storage room while she was getting supplies. The small space felt even smaller with his large frame blocking the doorway. "I'm getting tired of playing games," he said, stepping closer. "You've been teasing me for weeks with this innocent act." "I'm not teasing anyone," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm just trying to do my job." Rodriguez laughed harshly. "Sure you are, walking around in that little uniform, smiling at all the customers. You know exactly what you're doing." He moved closer, trapping her against the shelves. "I think it's time you showed me some real appreciation." Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She could see 3 different ways to disable Rodriguez without seriously hurting him. She could use the pressure point on his wrist to make him let go, strike his solar plexus to wind him, or sweep his legs to put him on the ground. Master Chen had taught her all of these techniques and many more. But she also knew that fighting Rodriguez would create bigger problems. He was a Marine with friends who would back up his story. She was just a small-town waitress with no witnesses. Even if she could prove he had attacked her, who would believe that tiny Sarah Martinez could take down a trained soldier? Instead, Sarah used a different kind of strength. She looked Rodriguez straight in the eye and spoke in a clear, calm voice. "Move away from me right now or I'll scream loud enough for everyone in the diner to hear." Something in her tone must have surprised him because Rodriguez actually took a step back. But his eyes remained cold and angry. "This isn't over, little bird. Sooner or later you're going to run out of places to hide." Sarah knew he was right. The situation was escalating and eventually Rodriguez wasn't going to take no for an answer. She also knew that when that moment came, she would have to make a choice between her safety and her secret. For the first time since starting her training, Sarah began to prepare herself for the possibility that she might actually have to fight. The situation reached its breaking point on a cold Friday night in November. The diner was unusually quiet because of a storm that had kept most customers at home. Sarah was working alone since the other waitress had called in sick, and Mr. Murphy had left early to visit his wife at the hospital. Around 9 o'clock, just as Sarah was starting to clean up for closing, all 6 Marines walked through the door. They were different tonight, louder, more aggressive, and Sarah could smell alcohol on their breath. They had clearly been drinking before coming to the diner, which made her nervous since she'd never seen them drunk before. Rodriguez led the group to a large table in the back corner, the farthest spot from the front windows and the street. Sarah's instincts told her something was wrong, but she had no choice but to serve them. She approached their table with her notepad, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good evening, gentlemen. What can I get you tonight?" Thompson slammed his hand on the table, making Sarah jump. Well, if it isn't our favorite little bird. Boys, doesn't she look especially pretty tonight?" The other Marines laughed, but it wasn't the usual friendly laughter Sarah was used to. This laughter was mean, predatory. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair and smiled that cold smile that always made Sarah's skin crawl. "You know what, Sarah?" Rodriguez said. "I don't think we're hungry for food tonight. We're hungry for something else." His eyes roamed over her body in a way that made Sarah feel sick. Sarah tried to maintain her professional composure. "I can get you coffee or drinks while you decide what you'd like to order." "What I'd like," Rodriguez said, standing up slowly, "is for you to sit down and join us. We've been such good customers for so long, I think we deserve some special treatment." The other Marines started to stand up too, forming a semicircle around Sarah. She realized with growing horror that they had planned this. They had waited until she was alone, until the diner was empty, until no one could interrupt them. "I need to finish my work," Sarah said, backing toward the kitchen. "The diner closes in an hour." "The diner's closed now," Thompson said, walking over to flip the door sign and lock it. "We're having a private party." Sarah's heart was pounding, but her mind was clear. Master Chen had prepared her for situations like this, though she had hoped she'd never need to use what he'd taught her. She mentally cataloged her surroundings, the layout of the diner, potential weapons, escape routes, and the positions of all 6 men. Rodriguez took another step toward her. 3 years, Sarah. 3 years I've been patient with you, asking nicely, being a gentleman. But tonight my patience has run out." "Please," Sarah said, still trying to de-escalate the situation. "Just leave me alone. I've never done anything to hurt any of you. Hurt us?" Rodriguez laughed harshly. "You've been hurting us every day, walking around here looking the way you do, teasing us, making us want things we can't have. Well, tonight we're going to take what we want." The other Marines moved closer, and Sarah realized that talking wasn't going to work. These men had made up their minds, and they thought she was helpless to stop them. They saw her as weak, defenseless, easy prey. But as Rodriguez reached for her, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was done being afraid. She was done pretending to be weak. She was done letting people hurt her just because they thought they could. "Stop," Sarah said, her voice completely different from the soft whisper the Marines were used to. This voice was strong, clear, and carried the authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. Rodriguez paused, surprised by the sudden change in her tone. "What did you say?" "I said stop." Sarah straightened to her full height and looked each of the Marines in the eye. "You have one chance to unlock that door and leave. If you don't, you're going to regret it," Thompson burst out laughing. "Did you hear that, boys? Little Sarah's getting tough with us. I'm so scared I'm shaking in my boots." The other Marines joined in the laughter, but Rodriguez wasn't smiling anymore. Something in Sarah's eyes had changed, something that made him instinctively take a step back. "You think this is funny?" Sarah asked, her voice deadly calm. "You think I'm helpless because I'm small? You think you can do whatever you want to me because I'm just a weak little girl?" "That's exactly what we think," Rodriguez snarled, lunging forward to grab her. It was the last mistake he would make that night. Sarah moved like water, just as Master Chen had taught her. She flowed around Rodriguez's grasping hands, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum against him. In one fluid motion, she twisted his arm behind his back and applied pressure to a nerve cluster that sent lightning bolts of pain up his shoulder. Rodriguez screamed and dropped to his knees. The other 5 Marines stood frozen in shock, unable to process what they had just seen. Their friend, who outweighed Sarah by more than 100 pounds, was on the ground whimpering in pain while the tiny waitress held him there with what looked like barely any effort. "What the hell?" Thompson whispered. Sarah looked up at the remaining 5 Marines, and for the first time in 3 years, they saw her not as weak little Sarah, but as something else entirely. Her eyes held no fear, no uncertainty, no submission. They held the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. "I gave you a chance to leave," Sarah said quietly. "You should have taken it." The 5 remaining Marines stared in disbelief as Rodriguez writhed on the floor, completely controlled by Sarah's seemingly effortless grip. Thompson was the first to recover from his shock, his face twisting with rage and embarrassment. "What did you do to him?" Thompson shouted. "Let him go right now." Sarah's voice remained calm and steady. "He'll be fine if he stops struggling. The more he fights, the more it hurts." She applied slightly more pressure, and Rodriguez's scream echoed through the empty diner. "You're going to pay for this," Thompson snarled. Charging forward with his fists raised, Sarah released Rodriguez, who collapsed to the floor clutching his shoulder, and turned to face Thompson's attack. The big sergeant was used to overwhelming opponents with his size and strength, throwing wild haymakers that could knock out most people. But Sarah wasn't most people. She ducked under Thompson's first swing, stepped inside his guard, and struck 3 precise points on his torso. The first hit disrupted his breathing, the second caused his left arm to go numb, and the third sent him stumbling backward, gasping for air and clutching his chest. "Impossible," one of the other Marines whispered. "She's too small." But Sarah had learned long ago that size meant nothing when you knew exactly where to hit. Master Chen had taught her that the human body had over 300 pressure points, and striking the right combination could disable someone 10 times her size. The remaining 4 Marines looked at each other uncertainly. They had expected an easy victim, not someone who could take down 2 of their strongest members in seconds. But their pride and alcohol-fueled anger overcame their caution. "All together," shouted Corporal Williams, the second in command. "She can't take all of us at once." The 4 men rushed Sarah from different angles, thinking their numbers would overwhelm her. They were wrong. Sarah had trained for multiple attackers countless times with Master Chen. She knew how to use their momentum against them, how to position herself so they got in each other's way, how to strike quickly and move before they could regroup. Williams came at her from the left, throwing a straight punch at her head. Sarah sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and used a leverage technique to flip him over her hip. He crashed into a table, sending plates and glasses flying. At the same time, Private Jackson attacked from behind, trying to grab her in a bear hug. Sarah sensed his approach, dropped low, and swept his legs. As Jackson fell, she rose up and struck a nerve cluster in his neck. He hit the ground unconscious before he knew what happened. Corporals Martinez and Davis tried to coordinate their attack, coming at Sarah from front and right. But Sarah had already moved, flowing like water between their positions. She struck Martinez in the solar plexus, doubling him over, then spun and caught Davis with an elbow to his temple that sent him reeling into the wall. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. 6 trained Marines, men who prided themselves on their fighting abilities, were scattered around the diner floor. Some were unconscious, others were writhing in pain, and all of them were completely helpless. Sarah stood in the center of the chaos, not even breathing heavily. Her uniform was still neat, her hair still in place. She looked exactly the same as always, except for her eyes. Her eyes held the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally been able to show the world who she really was. Rodriguez was trying to crawl toward the door, his shoulders still screaming with pain. Sarah walked over and knelt beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "I want you to listen very carefully," she said. "You and your friends are going to leave here tonight, and you're never going to bother me again. You're not going to tell anyone what happened because you're too embarrassed to admit that a tiny waitress took down all 6 of you." Rodriguez looked up at her with hatred and fear. "This isn't over," he gasped. "You can't hide forever." Sarah smiled, and for the first time in 3 years it was a smile with real confidence behind it. "I'm not hiding anymore, and if you ever threaten me again, what happened tonight will seem gentle compared to what I'll do next time." Thompson was struggling to sit up, still having trouble breathing. "Who are you?" He wheezed. "What are you?" "I'm exactly who I've always been," Sarah replied. "You just never bothered to look past what you wanted to see." One by one, the Marines struggled to their feet. They were battered, bruised, and completely demoralized. The men who had walked into the diner feeling like predators were limping out like wounded animals. They kept looking back at Sarah as if they couldn't believe what had just happened. As Rodriguez reached the door, he turned back one last time. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "You're just a waitress. You're nobody." Sarah unlocked the door and held it open for them. "No," she said quietly. "I'm somebody you should have left alone." After the Marines stumbled out into the storm, Sarah locked the door behind them and surveyed the damage to the diner. Broken plates, overturned chairs, and scattered salt shakers told the story of the brief but decisive fight. She began cleaning up, her movements calm and methodical. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt truly at peace. She had spent so long hiding her strength, pretending to be weak, letting people treat her badly because she thought it was easier than fighting back. But tonight she had learned something important about herself. She wasn't just strong in the gym with Master Chen. She was strong enough to protect herself in the real world. She wasn't just skilled at breaking boards and hitting training pads. She was skilled enough to defeat multiple attackers when her safety was at stake. Most importantly, she had learned that she didn't have to choose between being kind and being strong. She could be both. She could help people and still demand respect. She could be gentle with those who deserved gentleness and fierce with those who chose to be her enemies. As Sarah finished cleaning the diner, she realized that her life had just changed forever. Word would spread about what happened tonight, whether the Marines wanted it to or not. People would start looking at her differently, treating her differently. The quiet little waitress was gone forever, replaced by someone who commanded respect through strength rather than begging for it through submission. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the diner early as usual, but everything felt different. She moved with a new confidence, her shoulders straight and her head held high. When she looked in the mirror while getting ready for work, she saw someone she barely recognized, the same face, but with eyes that held strength instead of submission. Mr. Murphy was already at the diner when she arrived, standing in the dining room looking puzzled at the perfectly clean tables and chairs. Sarah had spent hours the night before making sure every trace of the fight was erased, but she knew her boss might have questions. "Morning, Sarah," Mr. Murphy said, scratching his gray head. "Strangest thing. I could have sworn I left that table pushed against the wall yesterday and now it's back in its regular spot." "Getting old, I suppose." Sarah smiled as she tied her apron. "Maybe the cleaning crew moved it." The morning passed quietly with regular customers ordering their usual breakfast items. But Sarah noticed something different in how she interacted with everyone. She stood straighter when taking orders. Her voice was clearer and more confident, and she met people's eyes instead of looking down. Several customers commented that she seemed different, more energetic. Around noon, the real test came. Sarah was refilling coffee for a customer when she heard familiar voices outside. Through the window, she saw 3 Marines from another unit approaching the diner. Word was already spreading through the base about what had happened the night before, though the details were confused and exaggerated. The 3 Marines entered and sat at a corner table, glancing at Sarah with curiosity rather than their usual dismissive politeness. Sarah approached them with her notepad, her heart steady and calm. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. What can I get you today?" The sergeant, a man named Foster, looked up at her with new interest. "You're Sarah, right? The waitress everyone's talking about?" Sarah kept her expression neutral. "I'm Sarah, yes. Are you ready to order?" Foster exchanged glances with his companions. "Is it true what they're saying? That you put 6 Marines in the hospital last night?" Nobody went to the hospital, Sarah replied calmly. Would you like to start with drinks? The second Marine, a young corporal, leaned forward. But did you really fight them? Rodriguez and Thompson's crew? Sarah set down her pen and looked directly at the three men. Those men made a mistake last night. They thought they could hurt me because I'm small and quiet. They learned they were wrong. Now, are you here to eat or are you here to cause trouble? The directness of her question surprised all three Marines. Foster held up his hands peacefully. Just to eat, ma'am. We heard what happened, and honestly, those guys had it coming. Rodriguez especially. He's been a problem for a while. As Sarah took their orders, she realized that not everyone on the base saw her actions as wrong. Many of the Marines had witnessed Rodriguez's behavior over the months and were glad someone had finally stood up to him. Word was spreading that the quiet little waitress had revealed herself to be something much more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Throughout the afternoon, more Marines came to the diner. Some came out of curiosity, wanting to see the woman who had taken down the Iron Six. Others came to show respect for someone who had defended herself against bullies. A few came hoping to test themselves against her, but Sarah's calm confidence and steady gaze discouraged any thoughts of confrontation. One young private approached Sarah directly during a quiet moment. Ma'am, he said nervously, I wanted to thank you for what you did. Rodriguez and his friends have been making life hell for some of the younger guys on base. Nobody had the guts to stand up to them. Sarah poured him coffee and spoke quietly. You don't need someone else to stand up for you. You need to find your own strength and use it when necessary. But I'm not a fighter like you, the private said. I don't know martial arts. Sarah sat down across from him for a moment. Strength isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing who you are and refusing to let others make you into something less. Sometimes that means fighting, but usually it means having the courage to say no and mean it. The private nodded thoughtfully. Where did you learn to fight like that? I learned from someone who taught me that true strength comes from within, Sarah replied. The physical techniques are just tools. The real power is in deciding you're worth defending. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah noticed that the atmosphere in the diner had completely changed. Marines who had previously treated her as invisible now spoke to her with respect. They said please and thank you and actually listened when she spoke. Some even asked for her advice on personal problems, sensing a wisdom in her that they had never noticed before. But the biggest change was in Sarah herself. She moved through her work with grace and confidence, no longer flinching when men raised their voices or automatically apologizing for things that weren't her fault. She had discovered something powerful the night before. She didn't have to choose between being kind and being respected. Late in the afternoon, Master Chen walked into the diner. Sarah felt a moment of panic, wondering if her teacher had heard about the fight and was disappointed in her for using violence. She approached his table nervously. Master Chen, I wasn't expecting to see you here. The old man smiled warmly. I heard there was some excitement here last night. I wanted to check on my student. Sarah sat down across from him, her hands folded. I tried to avoid fighting. I really did. But they wouldn't listen, and I was afraid of what they would do. Master Chen nodded. And how do you feel about what happened? Sarah considered the question carefully. I feel free. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like people see me for who I really am instead of what they assume I am. And who are you really? Master Chen asked. Sarah straightened in her chair. I'm someone who is kind to those who deserve kindness and dangerous to those who choose to be my enemies. I'm someone who will help others when they need it and defend myself when I must. I'm strong and I don't have to hide that anymore. Master Chen smiled proudly. Then you have learned the most important lesson I could teach you. True strength is not about hiding your power or showing it off. It's about knowing when to use it and having the courage to do so. As her teacher left the diner, Sarah realized that her life had entered a new chapter. The scared, quiet girl who had started training 3 years ago was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who commanded respect through strength tempered with wisdom, who could be gentle with the innocent and fierce with the guilty. The Iron Six never returned to the diner. Word had spread throughout the base about their humiliating defeat, and none of them could bear to face the tiny waitress who had revealed their weakness. But other Marines continued to come, drawn by curiosity that turned into genuine respect for the small woman who had proven that appearances could be deceiving. 2 weeks after the incident, Sarah's life had transformed in ways she never expected. The story of the tiny waitress who defeated 6 Marines had spread far beyond Camp Pendleton, reaching other military bases, local newspapers, and even social media. Murphy's Diner, once a quiet roadside restaurant, had become famous. Sarah arrived at work one Monday morning to find a line of people waiting outside the diner. There were Marines from other bases who had driven hours to meet her, reporters hoping for interviews, and even some women who had heard her story and wanted to thank her personally. "Sarah," called a young woman from the line, "you don't know me, but I wanted to tell you how much your story meant to me. I've been dealing with harassment at work for months, and hearing about what you did gave me the courage to report it." Similar conversations happened throughout the day. Women shared stories of finding their own strength after hearing about Sarah's fight. Men talked about how the story had made them reconsider how they treated the women in their lives. Parents brought their daughters to meet Sarah, wanting them to see that being small didn't mean being powerless. Mr. Murphy was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. "Sarah, dear," he said during a quiet moment, "I had no idea you were, well, what you are. How long have you been able to do those things?" 3 years, Sarah replied, refilling napkin dispensers. "I never wanted to cause trouble, so I kept it private." "Trouble?" Mr. Murphy laughed. "Child, you've doubled our business in 2 weeks. But more than that, I'm proud of you. Nobody should have to put up with what those men were doing." The new attention brought opportunities Sarah had never imagined. A local television station wanted to do a feature story about her. A women's self-defense school offered her a job as an instructor. A publisher reached out about writing a book about her experiences. A movie producer called about buying the rights to her story. But with the opportunities came challenges. Some people weren't happy about Sarah's newfound fame. A few Marines felt that she had humiliated their entire service branch. Some men in the community resented the attention she was getting for attacking soldiers. Anonymous letters arrived at the diner calling her everything from a troublemaker to much worse. The most difficult challenge came from Rodriguez himself. 3 days after the incident, he had filed a complaint with the military police claiming that Sarah had assaulted him without provocation. He told a story about 6 Marines who had simply been eating dinner when a crazy waitress attacked them for no reason. Detective Maria Santos from the local police department came to interview Sarah. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman who listened carefully to Sarah's account of the events. "Let me understand this correctly," Detective Santos said. 6 large, trained Marines came to your diner, locked the door, and threatened you. You defended yourself using martial arts training. And now one of them is claiming you attacked them unprovoked?" Sarah nodded. "That's exactly what happened." Detective Santos looked at the police report, then back at Sarah. "I have to ask, do you really expect anyone to believe that someone your size could take down 6 Marines?" Sarah met the detective's gaze steadily. "I expect you to investigate what really happened. Check the security camera across the street. Talk to the other customers who've seen Rodriguez harassing me for weeks. Look at the evidence instead of just assuming I'm lying because I'm small." The detective's expression changed slightly. She had clearly expected Sarah to be intimidated by the questioning, but instead found herself facing someone who spoke with quiet authority. "You're right," Detective Santos said. "I'll do a proper investigation." The investigation revealed what Sarah knew it would. The security camera from the gas station across the street showed the Marines entering the diner in an aggressive manner and leaving limping and defeated. Multiple witnesses came forward to describe Rodriguez's pattern of harassment. Even some Marines from the base admitted they had seen Rodriguez behaving inappropriately toward Sarah. When the investigation concluded a week later, all charges against Sarah were dropped. Rodriguez was reprimanded by his commanding officer and transferred to another base. Thompson and 2 others received disciplinary action for their involvement, but the legal victory was just one part of Sarah's transformation. The real change was in how she saw herself and how others saw her. The quiet, invisible waitress was gone forever, replaced by someone who commanded respect wherever she went. Local martial arts schools started asking Sarah to speak to their students about self-defense and confidence. Women's groups invited her to share her story at meetings and conferences. Young girls would come to the diner with their parents, asking for autographs and advice about dealing with bullies. Sarah found herself becoming an accidental role model, a symbol of the strength that could be found in the most unexpected places. She received letters from around the country, from women who had stood up to abusive husbands, from teenagers who had confronted school bullies, from elderly people who had refused to be victimized by scammers. One letter particularly touched her. It was from a teenage girl in Ohio who wrote, "Dear Sarah, I've been picked on at school for 3 years because I'm small and quiet like you were. After hearing your story, I started taking karate classes. I haven't had to fight anyone, but just knowing I can defend myself has changed everything. I walk differently now. I talk differently. Thank you for showing me that being small doesn't mean being weak." Master Chen visited the diner regularly during this period, proud of what his student had accomplished but also concerned about the pressure she was facing. Fame can be as dangerous as any opponent. He warned her one afternoon, "Don't let it change who you are at your core." Sarah poured him tea and sat across from him. "I think it's revealed who I was all along rather than changed me into someone new. For 3 years I was hiding my true self because I thought it would be easier. Now I know that being authentic is always better than being safe." "And how do you feel about all the attention?" Sarah considered the question. "Overwhelmed sometimes. Grateful often. But mostly I feel responsible. People are looking to me as an example of what's possible when you refuse to be a victim. I want to live up to that." As the weeks passed, Sarah began to understand that her fight with the Marines had been about more than just defending herself. It had been about refusing to accept a world where the strong could prey on the weak without consequences. She had proven that anyone could find the strength to stand up for themselves if they were willing to look for it. The diner continued to thrive, attracting visitors from around the country who wanted to meet the famous waitress. But Sarah made sure it remained what it had always been, a place where people could get a good meal and feel welcomed. She treated every customer with the same respect, whether they were curious tourists or regular locals. Sarah's story had started a conversation about strength, courage, and the assumptions people make about others based on appearance. She had become living proof that heroes didn't always look like what people expected, and that sometimes the most powerful person in the room was the one nobody noticed. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Sarah stood in front of a mirror in her new apartment, above a martial arts studio she had opened with Master Chen. The reflection showed a woman who bore little resemblance to the timid waitress who used to hide behind whispered words and downcast eyes. This Sarah stood tall, moved with confidence, and met the world with clear, steady eyes. The martial arts studio, called Hidden Strength, had become more than just a place to learn fighting techniques. It was a sanctuary for people who felt powerless, a training ground for those who wanted to find their inner warrior, and a community center where people shared stories of overcoming their fears. Sarah had used the money from her book deal and the documentary about her story to open the studio. She still worked part-time at Murphy's Diner because she loved the regular customers and didn't want to abandon Mr. Murphy. But her real passion now was teaching others what Master Chen had taught her. On this particular Tuesday evening, Sarah was preparing for her advanced women's self-defense class. The group included a lawyer who had been sexually harassed at work, a college student who had been attacked on campus, a mother of 3 who wanted to feel safe when jogging, and a teenage girl whose parents had brought her after she was bullied at school. "Remember," Sarah told the class as they practiced defensive techniques, "the goal is never to start a fight. The goal is to end one quickly if someone forces you to defend yourself. Your safety is more important than anyone's ego." Among her students was Jennifer, a young woman who reminded Sarah of herself 6 months earlier. Jennifer was small, quiet, and had been dealing with an abusive boyfriend who had convinced her she was too weak to leave him. "I don't think I can do this," Jennifer whispered during a particularly challenging drill. "I'm not strong like you." Sarah knelt beside her. 6 months ago, I thought the same thing about myself. Strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose to develop. Every day you come here, every technique you practice, every time you refuse to give up, you're building that strength. After class, Jennifer stayed behind to talk privately with Sarah. "My boyfriend says that if I keep coming here, he'll make me regret it. He says I'm getting ideas above my station." Sarah recognized the fear in Jennifer's eyes because she had felt it herself for so long. "What do you want to do?" "I want to leave him," Jennifer said quietly. "But I'm scared of what he might do." "Fear is normal," Sarah replied. "But letting fear control your life isn't. You have more strength than you realize, and you have people here who will support you. You don't have to face this alone." The conversation reminded Sarah of how far she had come, not just in terms of fighting skills or confidence, but in understanding that strength meant more than being able to defend yourself physically. It meant having the courage to make difficult decisions, to help others find their own power, and to create a world where people didn't have to live in fear. Later that evening, as Sarah was locking up the studio, she found Master Chen waiting for her in the parking lot. Despite his age, he still moved with the fluid grace that had first attracted Sarah to martial arts. "How are you feeling about everything that's happened?" he asked as they walked together. Sarah considered the question. "Grateful. Overwhelmed sometimes. But mostly I feel like I'm finally living the life I was meant to live. For so long I thought my strength was something to hide. Now I know it's something to share." "You've accomplished something remarkable," Master Chen said. "Not just in defending yourself that night, but in what you've built since then. You've shown people that anyone can find their power if they're willing to look for it." "I had a good teacher," Sarah smiled. "Someone who saw potential in a scared girl and helped her become a warrior." They reached Sarah's car and Master Chen placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You were always a warrior, Sarah. I just helped you remember." As Sarah drove home through the quiet streets, she reflected on the unexpected journey her life had taken. The incident at the diner had lasted less than 30 seconds, but its effects had rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. She had inspired other women to find their strength, encouraged victims to become survivors, and proven that heroes came in all sizes. The story of the tiny waitress who took down 6 Marines had become legend, told and retold until the details became almost mythical. But Sarah knew the real truth was simpler and more powerful than any legend. She had simply decided that she was worth defending, and everything else had followed from that choice. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer. "I did it. I left him. I'm staying with my sister and I'm safe. Thank you for showing me I was stronger than I thought." Sarah smiled as she pulled into her parking space. This was why she had fought that night, why she had opened the studio, why she continued to share her story with anyone who would listen. Not for fame or recognition, but for moments like this, when someone found the courage to change their life. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Sarah thought about the scared girl she used to be, the one who apologized for existing and made herself invisible to avoid conflict. That girl wasn't gone. She was still part of Sarah, still carried the empathy and kindness that made her want to help others. But she was balanced now by the warrior who had emerged that night at the diner, the part of Sarah that refused to be a victim, Sarah Martinez, the woman who had shown the world that strength came in unexpected packages, settled into her evening routine. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to help others find their hidden strength. She looked forward to it all. After years of hiding who she really was, Sarah had finally learned the most important lesson of all. The strongest person in any room wasn't necessarily the biggest or the loudest. Sometimes it was the quiet one in the corner who had nothing left to prove and everything to protect. Sometimes it was the small woman who looked like she couldn't hurt a fly but carried the heart of a warrior. Sarah had stopped pretending to be weak, and in doing so, she had given others permission to discover their own strength. It was a legacy she was proud to leave, one person at a time,